All right, UPSC contenders, especially those of you taking on international relations, this deep dive is for you. We're tackling a thinker who, I'll admit, can seem a little intimidating.
Yeah, he's got a reputation, that's for sure.
Karl Marx. But trust me, his ideas, they're like cheat codes for understanding how the world, especially global power, really works.
You got that right.
Exactly the kind of stuff that will make you shine in those IR exams, by the way.
People might think Marx is all economics all the time, but actually, his work is just bursting with these insights into conflict, ideology, social change. I mean, really, that's IR in a nutshell.
Right.
And we're going to help connect those dots for you.
You've probably heard of the Doctors Club, right?
Oh, yeah.
Sounds a little like a secret society for, like, brilliant minds.
It kind of was.
Which it kind of was.
Yeah.
And young Karl Marx was right in the thick of it, debating with some really radical thinkers, challenging, well, everything. I mean, already at this point, he was just obsessed with how ideas can shape entire societies.
And that is classic IR.
Classic IR territory, for sure. But here's the thing. Even in his really early work, Marx wasn't just focused on economics. I mean, his doctoral dissertation.
Yeah.
This is a guy who wrote, like, Das Kapital, right?
Right.
It wasn't about economics at all.
Yeah, no, it was about ancient philosophy, specifically the ideas of Epicurus.
Hold up. So the guy who wrote Das Kapital was deep into ancient Greek philosophy. That's not what I expected.
Right.
Not at all.
It's kind of a curveball, but when you think about it, it makes sense. I mean, Marx was really drawn to Epicurus because this was a guy, a philosopher who championed free thinking, pushing back against dogma, challenging the status quo. Sound familiar?
To all our UPSC folks out there.
UPSC folks, yeah. I mean, you guys are doing the same thing just by choosing IR as your optional.
That's a great analogy. So how does Epicurus connect to, like, international relations? I mean, I'm guessing it's not about, like, memorizing dates and names for the exam.
Exactly. What we're seeing here is Marx, right from the beginning, grappling with huge questions.
Okay.
How individuals can break free from constraints, how these power structures really work, how societies evolve over time. That's IR at its core.
Okay, so we've got Marx, the rebel student, right? Questioning everything, already obsessed with power dynamics. But before we go any further, we have to talk about one of his most famous concepts. And often most misunderstood concepts, to be honest.
Yeah.
Dialectics.
Ah, yes. Dialectics, it can sound super intimidating, I get it.
Right.
But for our purposes here, think of it as like a tool
Okay.
for analyzing how change happens in the world, through conflict and contradiction.
Right.
Basically, it's a three-step process, right? You have your thesis, the idea you start with, and then you have its opposite, which is called the antithesis.
Okay, so thesis, antithesis, got it.
Those two clash, right? They combine to create something entirely new, and that's the synthesis.
So it's not just like abstract philosophical jargon. There's a practical side to this.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, imagine you're analyzing, say, the rise of China in global politics, right?
Okay, yeah, good example.
From a dialectical perspective, you might see China's growing power as the antithesis to the existing U.S.-led world order. That would be the thesis, right?
Okay, yeah.
So the clash between these two forces could eventually lead to something new entirely, a new synthesis, maybe a multipolar world where power is more evenly distributed. You see? That's how dialectics can help you really think about the future of IR.
Okay, so you're saying we can actually use dialectics to analyze current events, and even predict future trends in international relations.
Yeah, potentially.
That's actually pretty cool.
Right.
But there was another guy, right?
Well, yeah.
Hegel, who was also into dialectics.
You're right. Hegel was a big influence on Marx, for sure. But here's the key difference for your UPSC notes. Hegel focused on the dialectics of ideas, but Marx, he grounded it in material conditions, especially the economy.
Okay.
Marx was saying, look, it's not just these ideas floating around out there. It's about real-world power struggles,
Right.
resources, who controls what.
Now that's something you can really sink your teeth into, especially for IR.
Right, absolutely.
It's not just about these abstract theories. It's about how those theories connect to, well, the messy reality of global politics.
Exactly. And speaking of connecting to reality, let's move on to one of Marx's most famous frameworks, the base superstructure model. This one's crucial, truly crucial for understanding how he saw the world working.
Okay, let's unpack this base superstructure thing. It sounds a little like an architectural blueprint or something,
Uh-huh.
but I'm guessing it's a bit more complex than that.
You got it. Imagine a building.
Right.
The base. That's the foundation in society. That's the economic system. For Marx, this was all about production. Who owns the factories? Who owns the land? Who controls the resources? This economic base then shapes the superstructure, which is, well, it's everything else in society. The laws, the political systems, even the culture, even our ideas, our beliefs are all shaped by this.
So it's like saying that the type of economy a country has influences everything,
Yeah,
from its legal system to, like, its art and music.
precisely. And Marx, he summed it up with a quote. You might want to jot this down for the exam. It is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but, on the contrary, their social existence that determines their consciousness.
Wow.
He's saying our material condition, like our place in the economic system, it shapes how we see the world. Literally.
That's a pretty radical idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, wouldn't that make us all, well, just puppets of the economy?
Well, it's important not to oversimplify. Marx wasn't saying individuals have zero agency, but that our choices, our worldview, are heavily, heavily influenced by these larger economic forces at play. Think of it like this, right? We might have some freedom to decorate our own individual apartments, but the structure of the building itself, the rules of the tenancy, that's determined by the landlord, the owner of the means of production.
Okay, that's a helpful way to think about it.
Good.
So we've got the rebellious student fascinated by anyone who challenged the norm. We've got this tool of dialectics to analyze change and conflict. And now we've got this foundation of economics shaping everything else in society. But how does this help us understand the world today, the world of international relations?
That's where it gets really interesting. Remember those 5 stages of history Marx talked about? We'll dive into those in a bit. But the key takeaway here is that Marx saw history as this dynamic process, constantly evolving through economic development and, yes, class struggle.
Class struggle. That's where things get a little controversial, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we're getting you prepped for those UPSC IR exams by unpacking the ideas of, well, as you know, Karl Marx.
We've covered some serious ground already. From Marx's early influences all the way to dialectics and that base superstructure model,
Yeah.
which helps us understand how he saw society working. But now, let's tackle one of his most powerful but controversial, I'll admit, concepts.
Yeah.
Economic determinism.
Yeah, this is where some people just kind of tune out, you know?
Right.
Because it sounds like Marx is saying that we're all just, robots
Yeah.
programmed by the economy.
Yeah.
But for UPSC IR,
Yeah.
it's crucial to understand the nuances of this idea.
Okay, so help me understand this.
Yeah.
Is Marx really saying that economics, like, dictates everything in society? Like our choices, our culture, even our beliefs, all just like products of the economic system?
He's definitely emphasizing the huge influence of economics. Yeah. But it's more complex than just saying economics equals destiny,
Okay.
Remember, Marx talks about the mode of production, and that's not just about, like, the technology and the resources,
Right.
but also about the power relationships between the people who are involved in production.
Okay, so give me an example here. How does this mode of production thing actually play out in the real world?
Well, think about colonialism.
Okay.
The mode of production in Europe was shifting towards industrial capitalism, right? Which, as you know, needed tons of raw materials and new markets.
Right.
So this economic drive, it fueled the colonization of, vast parts of the world.
Yeah.
And it shaped political relationships, legal systems, even cultural interactions.
For centuries.
For centuries, exactly.
So you're saying that even something like colonialism, which, we often think of in terms of just like power and conquest, right?
Yeah.
Can be analyzed through an economic lens.
Exactly. And that's a key takeaway for IR, really understanding how these economic forces drive international events.
Yeah.
Even those that might seem, purely political or ideological on the surface.
All right. I'm starting to see how this economic determinism thing can be useful. But let's bring it back to those 5 stages of history that Marx outlined.
Oh, yeah.
He claimed that societies move through these stages, driven by changes in the mode of production. Isn't that a bit too rigid for the real world?
Well, keep in mind that Marx was writing in the 19th century.
Yeah.
He was looking at these broad historical patterns. He wasn't trying to like predict the future with perfect accuracy. But those stages, primitive communism, slavery, feudalism, capitalism, and finally communism, they still offer a really valuable framework for understanding how societies evolve.
Okay, but haven't we seen, like, plenty of societies that don't fit neatly into those stages?
Oh, sure, yeah.
And what about places where, like, different modes of production exist, like, at the same time? Isn't Marx's model a bit too simplistic?
He was definitely simplifying things
Right.
to make a larger point. But for UPSC purposes, I think the real value lies in understanding that underlying idea that economic systems contain these inherent contradictions that inevitably lead to change.
So it's not about memorizing, like, the stages for the exam, but understanding the forces that drive historical transformation.
Exactly. For example, Marx would probably argue that modern globalized capitalism, with its intense competition and inequality, this might represent kind of a late stage of capitalism,
Mhm.
ripe with contradictions that
Yeah.
could lead to,
Further change. Yeah.
further change. Yeah, and that's the kind of analysis that can earn you points in your IR exams.
Okay, that makes sense. But Marx's ultimate prediction was a communist utopia, right, where this class struggle would just disappear. Didn't history kind of prove him wrong on that one?
Well, history's messy, and Marx couldn't have predicted, all the twists and turns. The
Right.
20th century saw, I mean, the rise and fall of all these communist states, often with pretty devastating consequences. But that doesn't mean we should just, like, throw out all of his ideas.
So what parts of Marx are still relevant for us today?
Mm-hmm.
Especially for those of us trying to navigate, well, this complex world of international relations, right?
Well, look around.
Yeah.
I mean, we're still dealing with massive inequality, exploitation, and these global power struggles.
Yeah.
I mean, those are all issues that Marx was deeply concerned with.
Right.
And his analysis of how capitalism creates and perpetuates these problems
Yeah.
still incredibly relevant.
So even though we might not be, like, aiming for a communist utopia,
Right.
Marx's ideas can help us understand and maybe even address some of the biggest challenges facing the world today.
Absolutely. Think about the debates around globalization,
Yeah.
the rise of these new economic powers, the struggle for resources and environmental justice. These are all areas where a Marxist perspective can offer really, really valuable insights.
I'm starting to see how this all connects. We've gone from this idea that economic forces heavily influence society to those 5 historical stages, and now we're applying these concepts to the real world of global politics. It's like we're getting a whole new toolkit,
Yes, yeah.
for understanding international relations. Welcome back, fellow IR enthusiasts. We're in the final stretch of our deep dive into Karl Marx, and believe me, we've saved some of the good stuff for last,
The best for last.
especially for you UPSC aspirants. This is where it all comes together, connecting Marx's theories to, well, the real world. Those challenges you'll be tackling in your exams and hopefully in your future careers as diplomats and policymakers.
That's right. We've gone through Marx's core ideas. Dialectics, base superstructure, economic determinism, class struggle, you name it. Now, let's see how these concepts can help us make sense of international relations, the whole big picture.
Okay, so class struggle. Marx saw it as like this engine of historical change. But how does this even work on a global scale? I mean, we're not just talking about rich versus poor within a country, are we?
No, definitely not. Think about it. The world itself is divided along class lines. You have wealthy, powerful countries. They're dominating global institutions, setting trade rules, controlling resources. And then you have other countries on the periphery struggling just for a voice, for economic justice, for basic needs, really.
So it's like class struggle, but like supersized,
Yeah.
playing out on this like world stage.
Yeah, exactly. And that has, well, huge implications for IR, for everything, really. Take trade negotiations, for example. Marx would argue that these agreements, they're not neutral. They reflect the power imbalances between these different countries,
Yeah.
with the stronger nations dictating terms that benefit, well, themselves, their economies.
So understanding Marx, especially his ideas about class, can help us,
Yeah.
see through all that rhetoric of free trade, understand what's really happening.
Exactly. It's about power. And it's not just trade either. Think about international law or the structure of the UN Security Council, even the way we talk about development and aid. A Marxist perspective helps you analyze these things to see who's really benefiting and who's getting left behind.
That's a pretty powerful tool for any aspiring diplomat to be able to analyze, global issues with that in mind,
Right.
power and inequality.
Absolutely. And it brings us to another big one, ideology. Remember, for Marx, ideology wasn't just about having beliefs, it was about how those beliefs are used to maintain power.
He saw it as like a tool used by the dominant class to justify their position.
Yeah, and to keep the system running in their favor. Exactly. So think about the narratives we hear all the time in IR, globalization, free markets, the spread of democracy. These ideas, they're presented as universally beneficial.
Right.
But a Marxist analysis would ask, who benefits from these narratives? Whose interests are really being served here?
So we need to think critically, not just take these narratives at face value.
Exactly. Look deeper. See those power dynamics that might be hidden just beneath the surface. And that kind of critical thinking is essential for anyone who wants to challenge the status quo, anyone who wants to advocate for a more just and equitable world. That's where Marx's ideas can be really transformative, not just for understanding the world as it is, but for changing it.
Okay, so we've talked about how Marx's ideas help us analyze class struggle, but globally, and see through those ideologies that often mask those power imbalances. But what about his prediction of a communist utopia? I mean, didn't history kind of prove him wrong?
Well, the 20th century definitely didn't play out the way he thought it would. The communist experiments in Soviet Union, China, elsewhere, they, well, had mixed results, to say the least. But that doesn't mean we should just throw out all of his work.
So how should we, I guess, approach Marx's ideas today, knowing that history, well, took some detours?
The key is to focus on his analytical tools, his framework for understanding how power works, how economic systems really shape societies, how ideologies function. These are still so relevant, even if his specific predictions didn't all pan out.
So even though we, might not be aiming for that communist utopia, Marx's ideas can help us understand and maybe even address some of the biggest challenges facing the world today.
Absolutely. Think about what we're dealing with right now. Climate change, global inequality, the rise of authoritarianism, the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of, well, very few. These are all problems that resonate with Marx's critique of capitalism.
So even though he was writing, back in the 19th century, Marx's ideas still speak to the 21st century.
More than ever, I think. And for you UPSC aspirants, that's the key takeaway. Understanding Marx's theories, it can give you this powerful framework for analyzing international relations, dissecting those complex issues, crafting insightful arguments, for your essays and exams.
Okay, future diplomats and policymakers, are you taking notes? This is pure gold for your UPSC journey. We've covered a lot in this deep dive. Hopefully, you've come away with a new appreciation for the power and the relevance of Karl Marx.
And here's a final thought for you to ponder as you continue your studies. If Marx were alive today, how would he analyze the world we live in now? Globalized, digital. Where do you see those seeds of conflict and change in the 21st century?
That's a great question, one worth really wrestling with. And on that note, we're signing off. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into Karl Marx. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives tailored for your UPSC journey, and leave a comment with your own Marxist analysis of the world. Until next time, keep those thinking caps on, and best of luck with your exams.